Hey everybody, Hunter back again from Showtime Studios. This is going to be part number 4 of the vinyl top install tutorials. And last night I went ahead and did the left side of the trim and got that on. And now we're going to work on doing the right side trim. I'm going to show you how to install that, and also some ins and outs on forming it. And then we'll get that on, and we'll be on our way to getting close to spraying the texture paint on this roof and creating our vinyl top. So first off, I'll go ahead and show you what we did last night off of camera. You can see the strip going around the back of the car, and see if we can get a good view of it here. You can see the little bump there in the center. That's the connector piece for the molding. And you will also notice that we left that piece of masking tape on there. And the reason why I do that is it creates a little bit of a ledge that, since that rear panel is curved this way, it has a curve in it. When I start working my little molding piece up into place, when I start from the end here, I can kind of rest it against that masking tape, and as I push it down and up, it rests up against the masking tape and keeps everything lined up, and it follows this curve. So that's why we left the tape on this one. If you were running it straight across, you really wouldn't need to use the tape, but as long as you have a mark to go by. But the tape is a good idea. It really helps line up the molding and get it to go where you want. And on this particular car, like I said, it is a custom car, and I'm not trying to replicate an actual factory molding. So what I did, since we're using the 60 thousandths wide half round, where this drip rail piece comes down, it actually tapers off a little bit right here at the bottom. So what I did in that case is I went in with the hobby knife, and right here where the drip rail tapers down, I came up about 60 thousandths of an inch, and I just pushed the knife through the molding, and then I come in from the bottom and just shave that little section off. And let me see if I need a little bit more out of that. Yeah, I'm going to take a little bit more out of that. And the next thing that I'm going to do is something you won't see on camera, but I'm going to go ahead and put on my little headset that we talked about, the magnifier, just so I can get in here and make sure I'm cutting this where I want to. That's why I highly recommend those things. And let's see, yeah, we're going to go ahead and take just a little bit more out of that drip rail, just to get everything to line up where we want it. And like I say, just be careful with, cutting this out. Just work on it easy. You don't want to be in no hurry when you're cutting this kind of stuff, because this is going to be a finished product. And the cleaner you can make the cuts and everything, the less cleanup you have to do, which means the less amount of area for having another flaw. And what I'm doing now is just cleaning out our groove that we have down the side of the trim, right there at the very end, to make sure that it stays cleaned out. And that's all there is to that. And I cut that off. That just gives me a new takeoff point for the molding that we're going to put on. So the next step is the molding itself. And like I say, I'm using 60 thousandths half round, and this was a straight piece when I started, and all I did was sit here and figured out where I wanted my curve and just kind of started flexing it in my fingers. You have to be careful with it that you don't snap it on the outside curve, because it stretches there and it shrinks on the inside. But if you just work it around a little bit, just cold in your fingers, it works pretty good. Now the one thing that will happen is on the bottom side of it that's going to be glued to the car, where the plastic kind of distorts a little bit, it has to go somewhere when you bend it like that, so it tends to go down. You want to come in with your sanding stick, and right through that area you want to lightly, and what I do is I just lay like the corner and a little bit of this onto my finger, and that supports it, and you can just move the sanding stick back and forth, and all you're doing is sanding out that little area that gets raised up right there. You don't want that because you want this to set flat against the body when you glue it on. And don't sand too much. Don't use too heavy of a grit on this. Just kind of take your time and work it until that lays out flat. And we're looking pretty good there now. So that's how our trim gets made and how we prep it to get it ready to go on the body. And I've already pre-bent this so that the corners match up. Now we will be flexing this a little bit when you put it on, because even though you bend this plastic, you could bend it to 90 degrees just about, but it's going to tend to bring itself back a little bit. But once you have that initial bend there, it's real easy to work this around to make the bend a little bit tighter once you start gluing it on the bottle. So I'm going to set the car down here, and hopefully everybody can see the steps that we're doing. I've got to try to figure out a happy balance between showing you guys what I'm doing and being able to see it myself. So the next step that we're going to do is we're going to take our molding, we're going to flip it upside down with the flat side up, and then I'm going to get a piece of plastic that I had here yesterday. There we go. Yeah, you can see that. I got to keep checking because the computer's behind me now, and I'm looking the opposite way of the computer, so sometimes I'm not sure if I'm in the screen or what's going on. I have to look over my shoulder to make sure. So just bear with me on that one. And what we're going to do next is we're just going to take a toothpick, and we've put a little drop of super glue there on that piece of scrap plastic. And I'm going to get a little bit on the end of the toothpick. And I'm going to move over here, and I'm going to come about 1/4 inch on each side of the curve. And we're going to put a little bit of super glue down on this. You don't want a lot down on it, but you want enough to make sure that when you get this down on the body that it will stay put. And the other thing is, if a little bit of the super glue tends to squeeze out, that's okay. It's easy to sand off. You know, it only takes maybe a minute or so to do the cleanup work around it, so don't worry about that too much. And it looks like I'm putting a lot on, but I'm actually not. Like I say, I've sharpened the toothpick, and I'm just using the very end of the toothpick to put the glue on. And I'm spreading it about 1/4 to maybe 1/2 inch at the most past the curve. So now that we have the glue on there, the next thing you're going to want to have handy is the accelerator. And what I always do with this is, this bottle's getting a little low here. Yeah, we should be good to go with that. But I always like to have that handy, especially on this step. And then we're just going to pick our molding up, and this is where the harder part comes to doing this. What you want to try to do is match what you have on the other side of the car. The first side's always the easy side to lay down. It's the second side that you got to match that's a little bit harder. So what I want to do is I want to come in and try to get the bends to be at the same location on both sides of the car. And the other thing I did is I took and I slid the molding up against that piece of masking tape that we have on there. And I'm just going to flex this bend around and get it somewhere near the front of our takeoff point there, just to see if we're looking pretty good. That actually looks real good, to tell you the truth. So I think as far as that piece, I think we're pretty much in the neighborhood. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hold this so it's basically heading the right direction there and heading the right direction here. And this is one of these things here that may or may not work the first time around. You may have to experiment. But we've got a little bit of accelerator. And all I'm doing is just dipping the end of the tube in there and then dropping it onto the super glue that's on the molding. And just hold that for a second. And basically what you want to look for is, at this point, you want to sight both sides of the car and make sure that that curve is pretty much in the same location on both sides. If it is, then you can go ahead and move on to the next step. and we're looking pretty good. I'm happy with what we have there. We're up against the masking tape. We're out past the masking tape with the bend about the same, just about exact on each side. And the next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and trim this piece of molding off. And there's a little trick that I use for that. And what that is have a scrap piece of plastic. This happens to be a piece of rectangle, but you could use flat, or you could use just about anything really that's scrap that you can get in here to cut this off. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and slide this back piece of molding up over top of the little bumper that we made here in the center, which is right there, and we've got it slid up over top of that. Now what I'm going to do is take my mechanical pencil, and right at the edge of that little bump, we're going to put a mark. That is where we're going to cut the molding off to blend it together right here in the center. And what I use this little scrap piece for is you can sit it underneath of there. This is where you get into that dexterity in modeling, trying to mess with this stuff sometimes. And the reason why I do this is I take a scrap piece of plastic like that, and when I push through this molding to make this cut, I'm not pushing on the car itself and leaving a mark somewhere in it that we don't want. Now, you could go through and snip that with a pair of snippers. The problem with that is it doesn't leave a straight cut. It's going to leave kind of a V cut, and you don't really want that. So that's the best way I've found to trim the molding. And I use that technique a lot, not just on molding. I use it on a lot of things that I'll cut that I'm fastening to the car when I'm scratch building or something like that. And what I have to do is I just check the fit, and I'm going to go ahead and take just a little bit more off the edge of that. Not much. We're only taking just a tiny bit off the end of it, just to make sure we get it in there the way we want it. Like I say, this part here is going to be a little tedious. It's one of those scratch building things that's going to be a final detail, and it's going to be out in the open and exposed. So you want to take your time and get it right and not cut corners on this. Okay, so I just test fitted it. Everything's looking pretty good there. So what we're going to do is we're just going to slip that piece of molding down. We're going to come in with our 8872 Testors black glue. And we're going to do the same thing that we did on the folds on the roof. We're just going to put a little bit of glue down, if I can get it to come out of the bottle here. I checked it before I started the video. There we go. Now we got something happening. And don't worry about that piece of masking tape. If you get a little bit of glue up against it, it's no big deal. It does come off. If you're using the Tamiya tape, I'm not sure about some others, but the Tamiya tape will come off. And while you've got that glue down on there, just kind of let that hang. You want to get another piece of masking tape, or a couple of them actually, because you're going to need them for various things. So what I do is just go ahead and tear them off and stick them here on the end of my workbench. And that way I've got them as I need them. And next we're going to go ahead and start working our molding into place. And this is the same procedure that, pretty much we used on the top of the car itself. But this time all we're doing is just sliding the molding up against the edge of that masking tape. You don't want to overlap it, but when you slide up against it, it will kind of give it a little bit of a step to rest on. And once you've got it slid up into place, I like to come over toward the end of where the molding is mounted. And I'm just taking my fingernail and pressing the tape down over top, getting it tight to the molding. We're looking good there. And that's pretty much all there is to getting the back section done. Now we're going to move on to the side section, and this one can be a little bit trickier. Now you could use super glue on this if you wanted to. I'm not a real big super glue fan when I'm trying to hold something that I need to definitely stay put. So I like to use the 8872 glue. But the next thing that I'm going to do is something that's a little bit more difficult. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to sight the molding into place, basically where we want it to go. And that looks pretty good. I'm going to hold it right there at the drip rail. And I'm going to make a very light mark with the pencil. There we go. Get the pencil to mark. And we're just going to pull that back, and now we're going to do the same thing that we did before. We're going to take our 8872 glue. We're going to go from the very front, and we're going to come back and drop it to where it meets the super glue that we already have down. We're going to slide the trim into place just like we did before. We're going to slide it up against the bottom of the drip rail there. And we're going to push it down just to get it to seat into the glue. And like I say, this is one of those things that's going to take a little bit of practice and a little bit of, patience and dexterity and, experience. So it's something that you need to practice on to, learn how to get this stuff to react and do what you want it to do. It's not really hard to do, but it is kind of tedious. So now that we have that stuck into place just about where we want it, we're going to come in with another piece of masking tape. Same thing, we're going to stick it to the sail panel, and we're going to take our fingernail and push it in top and bottom of the trim piece. And the next step that we're going to do is go ahead and trim off the excess. Now this here, you don't have an option of putting anything underneath of it, so be very careful with this. When you push the knife through it, and I'm coming down at the same plane as the drip rail molding, and I'm just lightly pushing the knife into the end of the plastic, just enough to get it to work through, and snip that off without scarring the body up, which is something you do not want to do. And that's that. Like I say, just keep a check on your molding and make sure it lays down, because you are trying to compound bend it in some areas. And if you see an area that keeps wanting to pop back up, the little pieces of masking tape that we made, just take those. It doesn't matter how many you use, and stick those down. And just use those to hold the molding into place where you want it to be. And like I say, just keep a check on it, make sure everything's good. One little trick that I will say that I do from time to time, and it's something that I've basically on the folds up here, I recommended that you did not do it. It's because this material is so thin, but on the molding that we're putting around here, this half round, it has a little bit more thickness to it. So once you've got it taped down like that, you can go in and put just a small amount of your Tamiya Extra Thin on the molding, and it will help draw that down a little bit more. And I also tend to do it on the top side and the bottom side of the molding. You're not worried about getting a little bit of this glue onto the body. It does not hurt it, as long as you're not doing a lot of brushing of the glue. All this is going to do is wick up underneath of the molding and help pull it down a little bit tighter to the body. And I also even do it here where we did the super glue part, because what that does is it actually melts the very edge of the plastic and makes it draw down and set tight against the body. And that's something that we're going to need for the next step that we're going to do. But that's about all there is to number 4. That's getting the molding into place. And those procedures kind of work on just about any type of molding that you're designing to go around a vinyl top. But that's all we need to do on this one. It's just the halo around here and the 2 folds. And just keep a check on this. Make sure it stays down, stays where you want it to be. Let it dry, and then you can pull the tape off. And then we'll come back and we'll start on part number 5. So if you have any questions or concerns, leave me a comment. I'll be more glad to get back to you on that. Like always, this is Hunter saying thanks for watching and supporting Showtime Studios, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.